get started. Thank you all for being here. My name is Kat Romero. I'm with the Oklahoma Faith Network. Oh. Whoops. This needs to have a little thing there. There you go. How many of you have heard of the Oklahoma Faith Network? See a show of hands. Okay, not too bad. Thank you. The good Kiera, our program manager, has heard of us. That's good. Well, we were founded in 1972, which was another year of a lot of societal upheaval, cultural changes, resistance to progress and equality. So it's interesting to kind of reflect on that time period when something like OFN was started. And we were founded as the Oklahoma Conference of Churches, but we changed our name to the Oklahoma Faith Network in 2022 at our 50th anniversary to kind of reflect more who we are. And we're we're the largest coalition of faith communities in Oklahoma, comprised of over 15 Christian denominations. So a couple of them, of course, we have Christian Church in Oklahoma. Give yourselves a cheer. Let's hear all the disciples. We have the Lutherans, Episcopals, Mennonites, Friends, UCC, UMC. So if any of your denominations or congregations are under any of those, we're represented by OFN at the Capitol, in the news, in the community. So please follow us on socials or sign up for our newsletter for any upcoming events, particularly those regarding collective action. That's kind of the purpose behind OFN, is to take our network, which includes interfaith partners as well, like CARE, Respect Diversity Foundation, OCCJ, as well as community organizations like Legal Aid, to use the power of that collective voice towards action and advocacy on issues that matter. So it's really our belief that we're stronger together and we're a much louder voice, so that people in our state know that there are churches, people of faith, houses of worship who believe that religious freedom means freedom for all religions, and that loving your neighbor includes all of your neighbors. So we really need to be a little louder, I think. So we plan to host monthly speakers like this with our partners. So keep an eye on our socials or the newsletter for upcoming talks, and we want to allow opportunities for networking, collaboration. That's why we were forcing you to mingle with the snacks. I mean, we're not going to force you to mingle without snacks. So that you have an opportunity to kind of work together, hopefully across different denominations and organizations, to co-host events, to basically make that voice louder, to share resources, to combine forces so that we can make a bigger difference. So in that vein, we're currently planning an Interfaith Day at the Capitol in April with our friends at the Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice. So keep an eye out for that. A huge thanks to our hosts, FCC Norman, thank you all, and to our partners at the Respect Diversity Foundation. So Mike will be sharing the story of his family, and he has amazing photos and his slides. So those slides, if you want to follow along with his photos, are on our website. So if you just pull out your phones and visit our website, it's okfaith.org, or you can just Google us. And it's on our homepage that says Korenblit presentation. You just click on that button, and you can follow along with Mike's presentation. And anyone who's watching the live stream can follow that as well. Or you can view it anytime later. It'll be on our website. So he'll be referring to his slides as you go along, so you can follow on your phone on our website if you choose. Is everybody there who wants to be there? okfaith.org. Okay. Michael's a best-selling author, former public school educator, and producer of documentaries, but he's also been a fixture of the interfaith community in Oklahoma for ever. Maybe. He founded the Respect Diversity Foundation with his wife, Joan, to promote understanding, respect, and acceptance across differences through communication, education, and the arts. So please join me in welcoming Michael Korenblit. Go.
Thank you, Kat, very much. And thank you all for being here today, especially on a Sunday afternoon. It's very nice outside, so I appreciate the fact that you would come in to be here. As Kat mentioned, my wife and I, little over 25 years ago, founded the Respect Diversity Foundation. In essence, it was to honor my parents, because the mission of the foundation is to teach respect, understanding, and acceptance for all people, no matter their differences. And today I'm going to go through part of their story and explain how what happened to them relates to very important issues of today. And the first thing I want to do is read something to you. This is from a recent op-ed I had in the Oklahoman, in the Viewpoint section. On January the 7th, 2026, I had a flashback of sitting in the living room with my parents in Ponca City, Oklahoma in 1981. They were telling stories to me of their experience during the Holocaust, as both were survivors. My mother began to cry as she started to relate the horrible memory. She and her good friend Esther were walking down the street of their hometown in Hrubieszów, Poland, wearing their mandatory yellow armbands with the Star of David. Before they realized it, a Gestapo officer by the name of Wagner was in front of them. They immediately jumped off the sidewalk into the street, because whenever a Nazi soldier was walking on the sidewalk to show respect to the Nazi uniform, one had to make way for him. Wagner simply pulled out his Luger and shot Esther in the head without provocation. As she fell to the ground dying, Wagner asked my mom, "Do you want the same?" My mom pleaded, "Let me take her to the cemetery." And Wagner yelled back to her, "Bury her right here." My mom cried, "Let me go get a shovel," and Wagner said, "No, bury her with your own hands." By this time, Esther had stopped breathing. As my mother finished sharing these details of this horrific moment, my father interrupted by saying, "These were many of the horrific tactics used by the Nazis in Hrubieszów." My mother did not finish her story, but I understood the meaning. The reason I had the flashback on January 7th, 2026, is because that day I was watching TV and an immigration and customs enforcement agent stepped in the front of Renee Good's car that was leaving a protest in Minneapolis. The ICE agent pulled his revolver, aimed at her, and shot through the windshield and pulled the trigger, wounding her in her car. He then proceeded to walk to the driver's side of the car and shoot her 2 more times, killing her. The federal government would not allow Minnesota law enforcement to investigate. They insisted that DHS would investigate themselves. As of this date, they have not shared that findings with the Minneapolis law enforcement. In case you were wondering, in my mother's story, Wagner was not wearing a mask and was never investigated for the murder of Esther. Renee Good's murder was not the first, and it will not be the last. I hope you all are able to see the pictures that you got on the phone. And you can see this first one is a picture of my mom and dad after they got married in 1946. Sitting in the living room in Ponca City with them, it was the first time that I noticed something on each of my parents' wrists. And it was a K and an L in blue ink. And on the inside of my mother's forearm was the letter A, followed by the number A2727. I asked my parents what those were, and they explained to me in the least horrifying and the simplest of terms that they were both survivors of the Holocaust. That was when I learned about anti-Semitism for the first time. Unfortunately, it was not the last, as we know what's going on in the world today and in this country. Next slide I have there, it shows all of the countries of Europe and it shows the number of people who were murdered, Jewish people who were murdered in each of those countries. I'm not going to focus on them. I'm going to focus on 3 other countries. One of them who is on here, and 2 that are not. The first one was Denmark. Denmark, from the very beginning of World War II, set up resistance in Denmark after the Nazis invaded. And they continued that resistance throughout the war. So when the word came down that the Nazis were going to start deporting the Jews to the camps, the resistance went into action. And what they did is they went to every single Jewish home in Denmark, warned the Jewish families about what was going to happen, and gave them a date, a time, and a place that they were to be. And when that time came, those Jews showed up, and there was every kind of boat and ship waiting for them on the shore there. And Denmark ended up saving 730 of their 7,800 Jews that lived in Denmark. The other 500 either were too elderly or too sick to be able to make the trip. But they saved those Jews. That's country one. Second country I want to tell you about is the country of Bulgaria. Bulgaria, as you might have known, was an ally of the Nazis during World War II. However, when the Nazis gave the order to the Bulgarian government that they needed to start rounding up their Jews to send them away to the camps, the leader of the, whoops, went the wrong way. Okay, Cap. Well, this screen that I'm showing you here, it says 6 million Jews. By the way, just so you understand what 6 million is, 6 million is the same number of people who live here in the state of Oklahoma, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, and Vermont today. That's what 6 million is. So, I told you about Denmark. Bulgaria was the second country, allied with the Nazis. There were over 50,000 Jews who lived in Bulgaria. So when the parliament in Bulgaria debated the issue, the Speaker of the Parliament said, no, we are not going to allow that. And they had a huge debate, and then they took a vote. And the opposition barely lost, but they did. And they fired the Speaker of the House lost his job and was kicked out of Parliament. So the Parliament voted and they said, yes, we will start rounding up and deporting the Jews. But something else happened in Bulgaria, and that was the people, the Bulgarian people. They rose up and they said no, they were not going to allow this to take place. There were stories even of Bulgarian farmers who would take their wagons and set them on the train tracks so the trains could not move for the Jews that were going to be deported. And because of the action of the Bulgarian people, even though they were allied with the Nazis, over 50,000 Jews were saved in Bulgaria. And the third country is one that you would probably least expect. It's the tiny country of Albania. Why would you not suspect that? Because Albanian at that time, as it is today, is a mixed country. About 75% of the Albanian people are Muslim. About 24.999% are Christian, and about 0.001% were Jews who lived in Albania at that time. So when the leaders of Albania saw what was happening, they became concerned for their own Jewish population. Meanwhile, the Italian fascists came in and occupied Albania. But what the Albanian people did, the government, is they issued every one of the Jews, from the smallest little child to the oldest adult, false documents, either giving them Christian or Muslim names. So if they were ever stopped, people would not know that they were Jews. Meanwhile, other Jews started coming in from other parts of Europe because they had heard that Albania was a safe place. So Albania ended up having about 3,000 Jews come into the country. Meanwhile, the Italians pulled out and the Nazis moved in. But what happened with those 3,000 refugees who came into Albania was the same thing that happened to Albanians' own Jewish citizens. Every one of them got false identity papers and were hidden out in the farms and in the mountains. And because of that, only one Jewish family in Albania were killed by the Nazis, and that was because of a mistake that they made themselves. So Albania ended up saving over 3,000 Jews during World War II. So the question has to always be asked, if those three countries could stand up to the Nazis, where was the rest of Europe and what was going on? Next picture I showed there, that you see there, is a group of men at Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. And what they're doing there is they are walking up 186 steps from the bottom where a quarry is. And what the Jews had to do is they had to pick up boulders, put them on their backs, weighing from 50 to 100 pounds, and walk up those 186 steps to the top. And one of the favorite pastimes of the Nazis at Mauthausen was to pick a Jew out as he got near the top and shoot him. So he would obviously fall, and he would knock other people over, and they would fall to their death as well, simply because of who they were. Next one I'm showing you, the picture you can see there, is the inside of a factory in Flossenburg concentration camp, which is in Germany. Both of those camps that I just mentioned, my dad was in. He had to carry those boulders up those 186 steps. This is a factory built under the ground at Flossenburg concentration camp. It is a Messerschmitt factory where they had to help build Messerschmitt planes for the Nazis. So my dad and his 4 buddies that he went through all the camps with decided they needed to try and do something. So they thought they would try and sabotage what the work that they were doing. So what they would end up doing is drill too many holes or not enough holes in the plane so the screws wouldn't fit, or they would not, when they were screwing the parts on, they would leave it loose, hoping that when the plane took off, the plane would start shaking and the plane would be destroyed. So they don't know if it worked, but at least in their minds, they felt they were trying to do something against the Nazis, what the Nazis stood for. In June of 1941, the Nazis broke the treaty that they had with the Soviet Union, and they invaded the Soviet Union. And lo and behold, that meant that they had millions of other Jews to round up. And what they did in Russia after they invaded was they didn't load the Jews up and deport them to camps. Instead, they took them out to large open pits where they simply shot them dead and buried them in large pits. The estimates are somewhere between 1 million and 1.2 million Jews were murdered this way by the Nazis after they invaded the Soviet Union. Those are the pictures that you see there of them being shot. But the Nazi soldiers themselves started having a problem with the fact that they were doing this. So the Nazis were very creative, and they came up with something else called mobile killing vans, where they would drive these vans to the outskirts of a town, a city, a village, and they would bring Jews out to these vans Some were large, some were smaller, where they fit anywhere from 40 to 80 people into the backs of these vans. They would pack the Jews in, close the doors, the van would be kept running, and they would take a hose that was attached to the exhaust pipe, and they would feed it back inside to where the Jews were. Problem solved. You no longer had to look at the faces that you were murdering, and you no longer had to waste ammunition. Everybody in those vans would be dead within 60 minutes, dying from asphyxiation. But the Nazis then got even more creative. And the picture that you see there are pellets called Zyklon B, which is a form of poison. The poison is given off by the temperature in the room. So this was the method that the Nazis used when they started the extermination camps, and they would put people into the shower rooms, where Jews would think that they were going to get a shower. Instead, they were packed in sometimes 350 people at a time. And with that many people packed in, it becomes very hot. The Zyklon B pellets would be dropped in, and within 30 minutes, every single Jew would be dead. They would then suck the poison out of the room, and they would go in, take the bodies out, examine them one more time for any valuables on the naked bodies, and then they would take them to the crematorium, where they would burn them. This is a camp in Poland called Plaszow. And the reason I show you this one, you can see the women there, their heads have been shaved. And does anybody know why they shaved their heads? Nope. Because in the camps, it was filthy in the camps. And because of that, the Nazis did not want their own soldiers to get sick from what was going on in the camp. So they shaved the women's heads because of the lice that was there. And they didn't want their own soldiers to be in that situation. So this next picture is a picture of my mom that you see there. That's from 1940, 45 or 46, depending. They aren't sure of the exact date. That is in Eggenfeld, Germany, where my mom and dad ended up living after the war. The reason I show you that, to take a look at that picture. Now look at this picture. I found that when I was going back through the archives of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and found that picture. If you cannot tell, it's a picture of my mom in Plaszow concentration camp. So if there was ever any doubt about whether my mom was a concentration camp person, we have the evidence. By the way, that's the hair that you see there from the shaved heads of the Jews. That's also the hair of the Jews that's been bagged up and sent back to Germany, where they were sent to manufacturing places that were making pillows and comforters and would use the hair of the Jews that they had murdered. Eventually, the Nazis, as you know, started deporting all the Jews from the labor concentration camps in the cities. And they would bring them to a site. While there were thousands of concentration and labor camps, there were only 6 extermination camps, and all of them were in Poland. So they would bring them to the site. They would tell the Jews that you're going to, after a long train trip, that you're going to get taken to have a hot shower. After the hot shower, you'd get a hot meal, and after the hot meal, you would be taken to your barracks where you're going to be housed. So they would take the Jews and tell them to take their clothes off so they could go into the shower. And they even told them at times, make sure that you keep your clothes together as a family so that when you come out of the shower, You can find your clothes very easily or put them all on a hook together. Mothers carried in their babies. Fathers held the hands of their small children, grandparents of their grandchildren, and they went in and they looked up, as you could see in the picture, and you could see faucets where the water was what they thought was going to be coming out of. And instead, the Zyklon B was dropped into the showers. And as I mentioned before, everyone would be dead within 20 minutes. Hello. Oh. Then they would take the bodies, put them on the crematoriums that you see in this next picture, and shove them into the ovens where they would be burned. And after hundreds of bodies had been burned in the crematorium, go back. Anyway, someone would go in, they would sweep out the crematorium and take the ashes, and they would combine them with other chemicals that would be used in fertilizer. So it started with hair and ended up being the ashes of the very Jews that they had murdered that was being used. And before anybody thinks for a moment that when the Holocaust started, it started with mass murder, it didn't. It started with the simple acts of harassment and bullying, trying to make people feel like they were less of a human being than the people who were doing it. Picture that you see here, and you can see a mother brought her small son to watch what was going on. And the people would sit there and watch as the Jews were forced to clean the streets with small brushes and buckets of water. Whole crowds would gather, as you can see in that picture there. And if they didn't think you were cleaning the streets fast enough, they would simply shoot you dead there. Those were the conditions that Jews were living under. Millions of other people were murdered by the Nazis in the same way that the Jews were. And you can see from the slide, they include the physically and mentally disabled, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses is the only other religious institution that the Nazis murdered during the Holocaust. Why Jehovah's Witnesses? Because all Nazis, all Germans had to take an oath of allegiance to two things. One, the Nazi Party, and two, to Adolf Hitler. And Jehovah's Witnesses refused to do that. As they said, they give their allegiance to a different entity, and that, of course, was God. So 18,000 Jehovah's Witnesses were rounded up and sent to the camps, of which thousands of them were murdered in there. It also included the Sinti and Roma, commonly referred to as gypsies. Second largest number of people outside of probably Russian soldiers that were murdered by the Nazis. Over 500,000 Roma and Sinti were murdered by the Nazis. Communist, socialist, rounded up and sent to the camps. Freemasons, if you can believe that. They closed down their institutions. Why do you think they went after the Freemasons? Anybody a Freemason here? Because Freemasons believed in total equality for all people. And that's what they preached in their lodges. And of course, priests, pastors, and bishops who spoke out about what the Nazis were doing were rounded up and sent to the camps as well. Okay. There we go. Oh, I missed that one. Okay. November 1932. That was the day in November of the last free democratic election that was held in Germany. And in that election, the Nazis did not get the most votes. They actually came in second or third. But it was enough for them to combine with other right-wing parties to come into power. And that's exactly what happened. January 30th, 1933, the Nazi Party comes into power in Nazi Germany. May 10th, 1933. This one I like pointing out because it affects us here in this state right now with things that are going on. You can see the names there: Albert Einstein, H.G. Wells, Ernest Hemingway, Jack London, Helen Keller, Upton Sinclair, Sinclair Lewis, Sigmund Freud. Anybody know what all those people have in common? I'm sorry? I'm sorry, I can't hear. They were what? Oh, yes, that's it, exactly. They were authors, exactly. And on May 10th, 1933, Nazis went into schools, to libraries, and started pulling the books off of shelves of all Jewish people and all people that they thought were not true Germans, or people who believed in the Nazi movement. And they took those books to the middle of cities, towns, and villages, where they proceeded to burn those books because they didn't fit in with Nazi culture and Nazi philosophy. This is a famous quote from Henry Kine from 1833, not 1933, 1833, because of something that was going on in Germany at that time. And what he said is, where one burns books, one will, in the end, burn people. He had no idea how prolific he would be with that quote. Just to give you an idea, Harry Potter series, Twilight series, 50 Shades of Grey, and our book, Until We Meet Again, have been banned in schools across this country. The movies Aladdin and The Lion King, banned in places in schools. In January 2022, in McKinn County's school district in Tennessee banned the Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel Mouse, which was written by the son of a Holocaust survivor, and it was a story of his parents. And he did the analogy of, instead of using Nazis and Jews, he used mice and rats in that book, and it was banned. Between 2010 and 2020, over 3,705 titles of books were banned in this country. Just to give you an idea, here are some of the books that were banned. You can see on the list there. And for those who don't have their app open on the phone, The Great Gatsby, Catcher in the Rye, Grapes of Wrath, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Color Purple, Beloved, Lord of the Flies, 1984, Of Mice and Men, Catch-22, Brave New World, Animal Farm, Farewell to Arms, Invisible Man, Gone with the Wind, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Lord of the Rings, Sophie's Choice, and I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Some of the greatest books that have been written in this country by American authors, banned because of what was written. Kansas, Virginia, Missouri, Utah, Florida, and Pennsylvania all banned books in 2021. That doesn't mean other states didn't. It's just that those states banned the most books in those years. And then we get into the whole issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which of course in this state they passed a law outlawing that at the University of Oklahoma, all universities in the state of Oklahoma, from any programs dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's where we are today. So if you wonder why what happened to my parents over 80 years ago is important to each of us sitting here today, those are the reasons. And if you need more, you got the Nuremberg laws. No intermarriage between Germans and Jews. Jews were denied the right to vote. Jews were denied the use of public transportation. Jews could only live in certain designated areas. Jews could not eat in German restaurants. Jews could not stay in German hotels. Jews were denied access to state colleges and universities. Jewish students could not attend public school with German students. And Jews had curfews. Do those sound familiar to any other laws you know?
The Jim Crow laws.
I'm sorry?
The Jim Crow laws.
The Jim Crow laws here in the United States of America. I bet you would not have any idea where the Nazis came up with the Jim Crow laws. As a matter of fact, in 1934, the Nazis sent two young lawyers from their Justice Department to the University of Arkansas for the express purpose of learning about the Jim Crow laws and how effective they were. They went back to Germany and they developed the Nuremberg laws. Just to give you an idea, you saw the Nuremberg laws. Here are the Jim Crow laws. No intermarriage between African Americans, or coloreds as they were called, and whites. African Americans had to ride in the back of the bus. African Americans were denied the right to vote. African Americans could not live in white areas. African Americans could not eat in white restaurants. African Americans could not stay in white hotels. African Americans were not allowed to attend state colleges and universities. African American students could not attend public school with white students. And African Americans could not be in white areas after sunset. That's why what happened to my parents over 80 years ago is important to each of us sitting here today, because we're still going through this right now. Soon, the Nazis started making all Jews in all the countries that they were occupying wear the yellow Star of David, so everyone would know who a Jew was, and they were open game for anybody to do anything they wanted. And when I say everybody, you can see even the smallest of children had to wear those stars. You can see the women walking down the street there wearing that Star of David on their clothes. This is the country of Poland. The country that's marked there, has a little red arrow dot there, is the town of Hrubieszów. That's the town where my parents were both born. It was a town of about 20,000 people. Of that 20,000, about 55%, which is about 12,500, were Christian, and about 45%, about 8,500 were Jews, including my parents and their families. My dad came from an immediate family of his mother, father. He had one older brother and another brother, and then my dad. And he had three sisters, three young sisters. My father's job at that time, he owned a couple of mills in Hrubieszów. So all the people would bring their goods to him to have it processed, whether they were Jews or Christians. So because of that, my dad's father got to know a lot of non-Jewish people, three of them who play a very important part in my parents' story in the Holocaust. As a matter of fact, the only reason I'm standing here in front of you today to tell this story is because of three Polish Christians who not only risked their lives, but ended up giving their lives to save my parents and their families during the Holocaust. My mother, meanwhile, that's a picture of my dad there when about a year before the war started, when he was about 15 years old. That's a picture of part of my mom's family. My mom came from an immediate family of her mother, her father, an elderly sick aunt who lived with them, and she had three other sisters, and three brothers. My mom's father was a handyman, a bricklayer, a builder. That's what he did to make a living. That's a picture of my mom about 2 years before the war started, when she was about 13 years old. My dad was about a year older than her. They met in elementary school, and my mom would tell you until the day that she passed away that when she laid eyes on him, she knew that was the person she wanted to be with for the rest of her life. My dad said, yeah, you know how male egos are. She was cute, he liked her, but he was looking at other girls too. But eventually, the two of them became boyfriend and girlfriend, and that was the situation in 1939 when the Nazis invaded Poland. Within a short time period, the Nazis, as you know, conquered Poland. My dad's father became concerned about my mom's father became concerned about her oldest son, Ellie, because they were afraid he might be drafted into the military or sent away to work. So they sent him away across the border into the Soviet Union, which is actually Ukraine. He eventually got shot by the Nazis there. So they moved them into ghettos in Hrubieszów, and that's the entrance to the ghetto of my parents' families in those houses there. If you see the fence there, I don't know if you can tell it because this picture is kind of small, but it still has the barbed wire on the top of it. This was taken in 1981 when I went back with my parents to do research about the book that I wrote about their experience in the Holocaust. And they still had the gate there and the fence up around what was the ghetto area in 1981. One of the people who was responsible for my parents, my mom and dad being alive today, is that person right there that you see in the picture. He happened to be the chief of police of Hrubieszów. His name was Henryk Gorski. My dad's father had become friends with him early on. One night after the Nazis had occupied their town and things started getting worse, Gorski sent his son to sneak into the ghetto of my dad's father's home to warn them that the Nazis were going to start rounding up the Jews and send them away. Meanwhile, my dad's girlfriend, my mom, lived in another part of the ghetto. So, as I mentioned before, that he was a handyman, a bricklayer. So the Nazis used to use him to build things for them. So early on, my mom's father, every day when he got to work, would look around the room and he would find a single brick and he would stuff it down his pants. And he would go about his work. The day would be over. The Nazis would march him back to the ghetto. He would go into his house, and the first thing he did is he went down to his basement, pulled the brick out of his pants, and hid it away. And he kept doing that every single day until he had enough bricks where he could build a false wall in the basement of a false wall in the basement of their house in case they would need it to hide. So there's a knock on my dad's door, and it was Gorski's son telling him that the Nazis were going to start deporting Jews. So they knew, and so Gorski said that they would be able to hide at his house. And so they made plans for the young daughters and for his other brother to go to Gorski's house to be hidden out. But as his mom was getting his young sisters ready to go, he looked at my dad and said, "I have to go see Manya, his girlfriend, one more time." He said, "Are you crazy? The Nazis will catch you and they'll send you away." And he said, "I promise you I will be fine." And he snuck out of the house made his way to her house and warned them about what was going to happen. So my mom and her family went down to the basement hideout that he had built almost a year before and hid out there. And meanwhile, my dad got back to his house, and with his family, they went to Gorski's, the chief of police's house, where he hid them out for 24 hours until it was safe to come out. 2 weeks later, knock on the door again. Same scenario took place. Only this time, the elderly aunt, who was very sick even before the war started, just said, no, she's too weak, she's too sick to go down. If they want to take me, let them take me. So the kids lined up and they kissed their aunt good night, and they went down to the basement hideout. When they came out the next day, she was gone. The Nazis had come into the house, found her there, and took her away. Meanwhile, my dad this time and his family were hidden out by the Commissioner of Roads, who they were also good friends with. And he hid them out for 24 hours until it was safe to come out. 3 weeks later, knock on the door again. Only this time, Gorski had told his sons to be sure and tell my dad's father this was the last deportation. They were rounding up the last 2,000 Jews of Rubieszów to take them away. So within a matter of just over a month, the entire Jewish population of Rubieszów, of 7,500 people, would be exterminated. So once again, this time they went to the third person who helped them. He was a young farmer by the name of Wisniewski. They had become friends long before because they used to bring his goods to my dad's father's flour mill to have it processed so he could sell it. And what Wisniewski did is the last time he harvested his hay, the back of the farm, he didn't take it to the market to sell. He kept it. And he took it to the back of his farm, and he built himself a haystack. And he kept building it until it was about 10 feet high. And then one night he went out and he proceeded to dig the inside of the haystack out so that there would be enough room for my dad's family to hide inside of that haystack. And that's exactly what happened. And they hid out in that haystack for somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks. Every night, Gorski, Salki, or Wisniewski would bring them food every night. They would go outside, use the bathroom, get some fresh air, and then go back inside and wait. And finally, they knew they couldn't live in the haystack forever. So my dad decided that some of them should go into the ghetto because they were using them for work. And at least they would be safe at that time. Because if they were caught, they would be immediately murdered anyway. So my dad and my mother, who had gone with him to the last hideout, and her brother Chaim, who had also gone with him, decided that they would go into the ghetto. When my dad left the ghetto, left the haystack that night, that would be the last time he saw his mother, his father, and the rest of his sisters, another brother again. Eventually they got on a train and traveled to a small town where my dad's father had his second mill and had turned it over to a family, a Polish family, a good friend, with the understanding that when it was over, he would be able to get the mill back. They got there, they waited for the train because they heard about a large ghetto in a town of Sokol. So they got on the train, and the train happened to stop in their hometown. The train started to take off, and all of a sudden it stopped. Passengers who had gotten on the train recognized my dad's family and reported them to the SS officers on the train. They removed them from the train, and they shot them dead there. My dad had no idea that this had happened to his family. Meanwhile, on my mother's side of the family, the Nazis came in and eventually searched the house, and they found the basement hideout. And they took my mom's father and mother and his sisters outside, where they shot them dead and buried them in a mass grave. Meanwhile, in the ghetto, the Nazis had set up there were 200 Jews, and their work assignment was to work on the roads for the Nazis to build. They had no idea at that time that those would be used for trucks going into the Soviet Union to continue the fight with the Russians. So they continued to live in that ghetto. And then my dad said, you know, we're going to die here, so we need to try and figure out a way to go, to leave. And before they could do that, though, the Nazis came in to the last ghetto. They had already taken 100 of the 200 Jews in the ghetto and sent them away. And they took the last 100 Jews, including my dad, my mom, and my mom's best friend, Tova Bornstein, along with 197 other Jews. Chaim had already been taken away in the first batch. And they took him to what would be the first for my mom of 5 concentration and extermination camps, and for my dad, the first of 8. First camp they went to was a place called Budzin, which was a work camp for the most part. Then they took him to a place called Mielich. It was in Mielich that they got the K and the L tattooed on their wrist that you saw in the picture there, that I saw as that 6-year-old little boy sitting in the living room with them. My dad, in Mielich, found my mother in the food line one day, because men and women obviously were separated in their barracks. And he said, promise me, when this is over, if we're separated, you will meet me back in our hometown. And she said, of course. The Nazis came in 2 weeks later, rounded up the women, and took them away. And that would be the last time my mother and father saw each other for almost 3 years. My mom went on to the Plaszow, the camp at Plaszow that you saw the picture of her there working. From there, she took a long train ride. Whoops. Get some pictures up here for you. There's the haystack. There's a picture of what the haystack looked like, and the cattle cars that they were boxed in. My mom went on this long train ride. She and her 4 friends that she would end up going through all the camps with. And finally, as the train was slowing down, they started smelling something that was really terrible, and they had never smelled anything like that before. Finally, the train stopped. They opened the cattle car doors, and everybody got out. And that smell hit them 100 times worse, and they just could not figure out what it was. And you can see on the pictures there, they lined the Jews up, and a Nazi colonel would go by each one of them and simply with his thumb go to the left or to the right. Most of the people were sent to the left. Those that were sent to the right were very lucky, because those were the ones that were sent into the camp. The rest of them were immediately sent to the gas chambers and then to the crematorium. It's a picture of the camp there at Auschwitz. You can see the concrete pillars there and the barbed wire fences on there. So as my mom learned in the first camp at Budzin, when she got there, what prisoners had done, she saw a group of men standing over on the other side of the fence, and she yelled out, Chaim Nagelstein, looking for her brother that she had been separated from, hoping that someone would know him. And somebody yelled back, yes, and she thought she had found her brother. And again she yelled back, Chaim, and the person again yelled back, yes, I knew him. They took him away yesterday. When my mom got into the barrack, she was informed where they had just been brought. It was to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And they told them what happened there. And the smell that they had been smelling even before the train got in the camp was that of the burning bodies from the crematorium. So my mother knew then that her brother had been sent to the gas chambers and then to the crematorium. My mom was very lucky, along with her 4 friends, that she went through all the camps with. One of the reasons they were so lucky is because my mom's best friend, Tova, from Hrubieszov, every assignment she got in the camps that they were in was in the kitchen. So she would literally steal food and bring it back that she would share with the 4 of them, would share that extra food. And while it wasn't much, it was enough to give them the spirit of the fact that they had more food. Finally, my mom and her 4 friends were sent to the last camp, which was in Czechoslovakia. And in May of 1945, my mother and her 4 friends were liberated by the Russian forces. When my mom was liberated, she was just about 5 foot and weighed 65 pounds. First thing that they did, they went into the city. What do you think the first thing they did was? Anybody? Took a hot bath, something they had not had in forever. Then they packed up some food, got clothes, and true to my mom's promise to her boyfriend, they got on a train and headed back to Hrubieszov, where she would wait for my dad. Meanwhile, my dad had been taken through 7 more camps from the first one, and they were taken out on what was called a death march, where they literally were emptying out the camps and walking the Jews to death. If you fell, they simply shot you dead right there. So on the second night of the death march, my dad and his 4 friends knew they were going to be murdered, so they were trying to get away. So that night, they waited until they thought the guards were asleep, crawled along the ground until they finally jumped up and started running as fast as they could go. And they finally found this barn, German barn, went inside totally exhausted and fell asleep. They were awoken the next morning by this dog barking and somebody singing. One of my dad's friends went and peeked out, and sure enough, it was the farmer coming to the barn to do some chores. So they knew they had to hide. So they buried themselves underneath the hay in the barn. And sure enough, they could hear the door opening up. They felt the dog actually running around on top of them as they buried themselves under the hay. Finally, one of them jumped up out of the hay. The farmer's so surprised, he yells. Well, the reason the person jumped up out of the hay is because the farmer had taken a pitchfork to pitch some hay and stuck one of my dad's friends right in the leg. That's why he jumped up. They're staring at each other, and then my dad and his other 3 buddies jump up out of the hay, and they explained who they were, that they just escaped from a Nazi death march. And the farmer said, "Wait here." So they had no idea whether to trust him or not, but they did. And sure enough, about 20 minutes later, he came walking back with a basket of food and some water. But he told them they had to leave that night because if the Nazis caught them there, that they would kill him and his family. So they promised they would leave that night. It got dark, they snuck out of the barn, started to go, and they said, "We have no idea where we're going." So they decided to go back in and get another good night's sleep. They were awoken the next morning by this rumbling noise outside. One of my dad's friends went and peeked out the door, and coming down the road was something that my dad said he had only seen one other time before in his life, and it was in a book in school. Coming down the road were Jeeps and trucks with American flags on them. And my dad and his 4 buddies went outside and were liberated by the American forces. The day that my dad was liberated, you all, if you can believe this or not, was April 19th, 1945. Did April 19th ring a bell with you? That's the bombing here in Oklahoma City. That was the day that they were liberated on. My dad and his 4 buddies, when my dad was liberated, he was about 5'9", and he weighed 87 pounds. My dad did not do what his girlfriend did and immediately go back. Instead, he said there's just no way she could have survived with everything that he saw. And someone gave him an address of a place where he could possibly get a job in Munich from where he was living in Eggenfelden. So he got on a train, didn't know why he picked that day, got to Munich, got the address, and he's walking down the street, and all of a sudden he hears somebody yell out his name. And he knows nobody knows him here in Germany. And he kept walking, because that's what you did in the camp. You ignored anything when you were yelled at. And he kept walking. Finally, somebody grabbed him and spun him around, and it was a friend of my dad's brother, and they had served in the Russian army together. And my dad's brother had been killed. But he looked at my dad and he said, "What are you doing here?" And he explained, I was in the camps and everything we had gone through, and he said, "No. My dad's brother's friend had come back from Russia through Hrubieshov and had seen my mother's there, my dad's girlfriend, and said, 'Your girlfriend is waiting for you back in Hrubieshov.'" And he got permission from the American authorities to go into Poland because it was already occupied by the Russians then. And he found her and brought her back to Germany. They immigrated to the United States in 1950 with their 2.5-year-old son, my brother, who was born in Germany. One of the first things she did when she got here to America, and believe it or not, of all places, they sent them to Ponca City, Oklahoma. And that's where I was born. But the first thing was she had a doctor's appointment who gave her a screening to make sure she was healthy. And the doctor said, "I cannot find anything physically the matter with you, but with everything you've gone through, you should probably not have any more children." I was born 11 months later, and I think I'm okay. So, as I mentioned before, God, I don't even know what time it is, 5:30. So I've mentioned some of the things, that how it relates to, oh, come on, I want to go back. Oh, slide jumped over. So I want to, it's a list of names that I wanted to read to you here real quickly, since I didn't show it to you. The names are Richard Brown, Elmer Edwards, Gwen Fuller, Betty Germany, Lizette Jones, Calvin Looper, Marilyn Looper, Lana Pogue, Ayana Najuma, Alma Faye Posey, Barbara Posey, Arid Tolliver, and Portwood Williams Jr. Do those names sound familiar to anybody? Do you recognize any of those names? Those were the 13 young kids, aged 6 to 16, who on August 19th, 1958, went and sat down at Kat's drugstore at the counter and ordered 13 Coca-Colas, and ended up changing the course of history. It also changed my history, because when my dad came home from work and he saw that on the news, it so bothered him that when the first day he had off was that Saturday, I was playing in the backyard and he said, "Mike, come and take a ride with me and your mom. And my parents drove me to a park in Ponca City. We got out of the car, walked into the park, walked up to a water fountain. My dad asked me to take a drink out of the water fountain. And I did. He said, "How did that taste?" And I said, "Wonderful. Cold water on a hot August day. What could be better?" And then my dad asked me to read the sign on the water fountain to him. And I read it, and it said it said whites only. He then walked me to a water fountain not 10 feet away and asked me to take a drink out of it. And I did. And he said, "How did that taste?" And I said, "The same as the water that I just drank out over there." And again, he asked me to read the sign, and it said coloreds only. Without saying a word, we walked back to the car, and my parents drove me down to the bus station. We got out of the car and we went inside, and there was a podium there like this right here, and there was a sign on it, and my dad asked me to read the sign with he and my mom. And the three of us read it together, and it said white waiting area. Nice area, ceiling fans going on a hot August day, nice chairs, benches. And then my dad walked me and my mom walked me to the back of the bus station. Not so nice area, no ceiling fans, broken chairs, and there was a sign tacked up on the wall. And again, my dad asked me to read the sign with he and my mom. And the three of us read it together, and it said colored waiting area. And my dad looked at me, his 8-year-old son, and said, "I want you to always remember what I've shown you here today, because that's the very reason that you don't have any grandparents and lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, because people looked at them as being different and inferior human beings." What my dad saw on television and then read in the paper for the next few days was the story of those 13 kids who ended up changing the course of not only Oklahoma City history, but Oklahoma history and American history by starting the sit-in movement that traveled across this country. That's who my parents were. They were two of the most optimistic people that you could ever meet, incredibly so. And they taught me the lessons of the Holocaust and the lessons of what we were still doing in this country. My dad could not believe that that was going on in this country. That this country that sent 11 million soldiers to Europe to free the country from the Nazis, only to have those people come back and be treated like garbage in this country. And that's why he stood up throughout the years and speaking out about that. And he got some criticism for it from the community in Ponca City, and not just the Christian community, but that's who they were. And I know I've gone on a little longer than I should, but something that's so important, I think, with all of us, with what's going on right now, and that's with immigration. I have to share this with you. In the Talmud, in the Torah, the Jewish Bible, there was one item that is mentioned in the Torah 36 times, more than any other thing that's mentioned in the Torah. 36 times. Anybody know what it is? Welcome the stranger. And one of my favorite prayers from the Mikshab Halev prayer book is this: love the strangers among you. Love them as yourself. See yourself in their eyes. With your own hands bind up their wounds. Teach your children to unlock their hearts and share their wealth. Inscribe words of welcome at your gates and ports of entry, for you have been strangers in every corner of the world. And today you see what we're living through here in this country, and how those strangers are looked at by this government, and unfortunately by a lot of those people who support that government. My parents, if they were alive today, would be fighting it the same way that they did about racism when they first got here to America. we all must end up standing up for what's going on in the world around us. I will leave you with 4 quick quotes here. I think I will. Oh. Maybe I won't. But, by the way, after World War II, we said never again. Unfortunately, we also have failed there. I could go through the list, I don't have time, of all the genocides that have taken place since World War II, but more specifically, since Lyndon Johnson was president. Every president of the United States has had a genocide or an ethnic cleansing take place on their watch. So the idea of never again sometimes rhymes very hollow. I'm sorry, I do want you to have this, read this though, as the last thing. Really, Mike? Boy, I cannot find it. So I may not share it with you. Yes, I will. In 1700 something, there was a famous British legislator by the name of Edmund Burke. And Edmund Burke made the following quote: "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing." Margaret Mead, famous anthropologist: "Never doubt a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." From Tenzin Gyatso, who was the 14th Dalai Lama, and he said, "It is not enough to be compassionate, you must act." And the last one is from Martin Luther King Jr. "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." We can't be silent with what's going on in this world around us today. As I said, my parents were 2 of the most optimistic people you could ever meet, and they would be out there fighting today. So thank you all for having me here today. I'm sorry if I went over. Anybody have a question you want to ask?
Would you say your parents' names?
What?
What were your parents' names?
Oh, Manya and Meyer. Yes. Anything else? No?
What's the name of your book?
Oh, the name of my book is Until We Meet Again, which is taken in the fact that my mom and dad thought they would never meet again after being separated, and also because 39 years later, after we thought that Chaim, my mom's brother, had been murdered in Auschwitz-Birkenau, when I was doing research on the book, I ended up finding him in Newcastle, England, alive and well. And on January the 30th, 1982, they were reunited after 39 years of separation. So that's why the book, Until We Meet Again. No? Anything else? Wow, surely. Yes.
How far in advance did the Nazis plan these camps? Because they had to have a lot of work done before they started rounding up the people.
Well, they started doing them in the very beginning. When they came into power, they started building the first camps. The first ones were for their political enemies, and they started sending them there. And then it just kept expanding, and of course, then eventually it became extermination camps in those. Okay, nobody has, wow, I answered everything, or I didn't answer anything, so, yes.
I kept trying to use your PowerPoint, and it kept going to my Google Drive. In April of 1945, my father wrote a letter to his family,
We're all different people. So, interesting. He was liberated from Dachau? Your, this was your father?
My father. And he was a commander of Negro men that they called, and during the liberation, his company was not allowed to pass.
Was he, what nationality was he? What nationality was he?
There were black Americans.
Oh, black Americans, okay.
He was the captain, and so his company, it was settled at that
Yeah.
time. And so during the liberation, all of the troops were given passes to go wherever, except
Right.
the black soldiers had to remain.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the Israeli government has an award called the Righteous Among Nations, which recognizes those Christians or others who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. And as of this date, there are 28,426 of them from 50 different countries. The U.S. has 5 that have been recognized. And the last one recognized was a Sergeant Edmonds from Tennessee. And the reason they recognized him was because after the Battle of the Bulge, he was captured along with a lot of other American soldiers, and they were in Camp Stalag 9-A. And as the highest commanding person, non-commissioned person, as a master sergeant, he was the person that the Nazis dealt with. So once they came to deal with him, and he said, tomorrow, I want you to have, there were 1,000 men there, I said, I want you to have all of the Jews out here in the morning. And Edmonds replied, well, I'm not going to do that. And the sergeant and the Nazi said, I will give you until the morning to make sure that they're out here, just the Jews. The morning came, and all 1,000 troops were out there that was under his watch. And the German soldier came up, the colonel came up, took his gun out, put it to Edmund's head and said, if you don't tell the Jews to step forward, I'm going to kill you. And he said, go ahead and kill me, and there will be evidence, and you will be brought to trial. And he said, just point out the Jews. And Edmund was to have reported what he said was, in front of his troops there, we are all Jews. And the Nazis left it at that. And he saved over 200 Jews who were in the American army in that camp. So it just goes to show you what people will do and what people are willing to do. Whether it was my 3, of which I'm alive today, which all 3 of them, 2 of them were murdered by the Nazis for helping Jews. 1 of them died in an accident dealing with the Nazis. Or it's a middle school in Paris, France, called Michel Bizet Econ. The Nazis came into that middle school and said they wanted to see the Jewish students, and the principal said, well, we don't know who the Jewish students are. And he said, tomorrow, when I come back, I want all the Jewish kids wearing a Star of David. So the principal made the announcement to all the Jews that are in the school that you needed to make sure that you wore your Star of David when you come into school the next day. And all the kids knew that that was the sign. Now, these are middle school kids. They're 12, 13, and 14. When the Nazis came in the next day, every single kid was wearing a Star of David. We need to make sure people in this country today are doing those same kind of actions to stand up against what is happening here today. I don't want to keep going. I could, but I won't. So thank you all again for being here.